Okay. Oh my god, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I also don't know what else to do. So, reaction videos are like big money on YouTube, right? Like everyone loves reaction videos. Person reacts to person doing thing. There's this guy, his YouTube channel is just metal musicians put out songs and albums and then he films himself listening to them and you watch him listen to them. And his video just gets so many views and the algorithm keeps pairing me up with him saying you have to watch his videos where he reacts to things that you like. I don't get it. And this is basically what I'm doing. So I am reacting to the long list of the Women's Prize 2021 because I want to talk about it. So I'm framing it as a reaction video. What am I doing? What am I doing with my life? Anyway, the long list for the Women's Prize was just announced, and I've read some of the books, and I'm familiar with some of the books, and I'm not familiar with some of the books. The Women's Prize is a nice prize, and the judges this year are being led by Bernardine Evaristo, who is an absolute national treasure of black British literature, and I loved Girl, Woman, Other, so I'm happy that she's the chair of the judges. And what we have here from her and her judges are 16 books by women. There is one controversy, which I will get to. But first, I'm going to start with the books that I do know that I can recommend, or that I have been meaning to read and haven't gotten to yet. First up is Luster by Raven Leilani. I have a video reviewing Luster, and I've mentioned Luster in a bunch of articles on our website. I'm a huge fan. This book only just came out this year, I think in January. I adored it. I thought Luster was a fantastic book, set in New York, about a very, very young black woman in her early 20s who gets mixed up in a relationship with an older white man in his suburban home, and our protagonist befriends this white couple's adopted black daughter. It's a lovely story. The way that it's written is very, very sharp and very witty, and lots of, modern pop culture references, etc. It feels very, very current, very generational, very millennial. I adored it, and I really, really recommend it. If you needed another reason to finally pick up Luster, then the fact that it's on the long list for the Women's Prize, that's all you need. It's a really great book, and I am so happy to see it on here. This is awesome. Another book on the long list that I have read, and I also have a video on this channel that you can watch, is Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan. This is a book that I've kind of gone back to emotionally. I haven't reread it, but I've gone back to it and thought about it a little bit more since I read it and did a video on it. And I don't look back on it as kindly as I did when I initially read it. Like, I was pretty positive about it in my review. I didn't think it was a perfect book. I had some issues with it, but I did overall enjoy it, and looking back, I actually see a lot more problems with it. It feels very self-aggrandizing. There's problems with it. I don't love it half as much as I did. I'm happy that it's on here, because Nisha Dolan is an interesting character, and her book is good. Just don't know if it's that good anymore. Changed my opinion on it a little bit. I would go back and reread it, but I sold my copy and I don't care enough. But I don't have as fond a memory of it as my initial reading justified, if that makes sense. So, I'm pretty tame on that one. Another one that I was really surprised to see, kind of happy to see, but surprised to see, was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Now, I read Susanna Clarke's first novel, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and I really, really loved that book. I read it over like 2 weeks. It's a massive 1,200 page book, and I absolutely adored it. It's historical, fantastical, magical, beautiful, beautiful book, gorgeously written, and I thought that it represented a very, very exciting career to come, and then she did nothing for like 12 years or something, and finally came out with this, and it's a really short book, 200-page book. I haven't yet gotten to it, but I have read a lot about it, and I'm surprised to see it on here because the Women's Prize often deals with politics in some way. The Women's Prize is about women, it's about women's issues, it's about feminism, it's about class and race and topical issues, and Piranesi doesn't seem to fit into that, which I think is kind of refreshing. It's genre fiction, it's surrealism, it's strange and fantastical, at least from what I've read, and I have read quite a lot. So I think that it's interesting for a book to be on this list that doesn't really fit into the more political and topical bracket of literary fiction. Although maybe it is literary. Again, I haven't read it yet. I keep meaning to, and I haven't gotten to it yet. So I can't definitively say, but I can definitively say that I am a big fan of Susanna Clarke's writing, and her first book, So this is pretty cool. Next up is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. Now, this is a book, I remember when it came out that I was snowed under by review copies. I had like 100 review copies land in my lap the month that this book came out. And the lockdown had lifted, I think, and we were allowed to go into bookshops. It was like the middle of summer or something, and I wanted to go pick it up from Waterstones, and I stopped myself because I didn't have much money and I had too many books to read and I couldn't justify it. Anyway, this is a very roundabout way of saying I haven't read The Vanishing Half yet, and this is probably the push that I needed. And also Waterstones brought out a gorgeous copy of it for Christmas, and I nearly bought it then, and again I had too much to do and mental health and blah blah blah. So I still haven't read The Vanishing Half, and I would say of all the books on this list, this is the one, the joint one with one other that I'm most excited to finally get to. The Vanishing Half, as far as I know, it's about two sisters, they might be twins, who grew up in the American South. They're black and they end up living very, very different lives politically and racially, I guess. It sounds fantastic, and Bernardine Evaristo herself, I know, is a huge fan. I think she wrote the foreword for it, at least the UK edition. And so that's reason enough to pick it up, and so is this. So I finally need to read The Vanishing Half. It's been universally praised, and I have no reason not to read it now. Another one that I have seen everywhere, my partner wanted to read it, I wanted to read it, and I just haven't, and I do not have a good excuse, is Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. I haven't got a good reason that I haven't read it, and I can't even remember what it's about, but I know that Burnt Sugar was absolutely beloved by a bunch of my friends, a bunch of other readers and critics, and it's something that I am now absolutely going to get to. You can probably tell by now that I am not familiar with every book on this list, and this is kind of a video of me recommending books and also just talking about what I'm going to be picking up now, or, as is the case with at least one of them, steering very, very clear of. And Burnt Sugar is absolutely at the top of my list. So this list is pretty much books that I have read and I recommend, books that I haven't read and I do recommend still because I'm going to be reading them and I'm excited for you and me to read them both, and then also at least one book that I'm not going to read, and I'll explain why. One curious book is a book by Dawn French called Because of You. I think I've seen this around, but I am really surprised to see it, only because it's a book by a celebrity who is not really famed for being an author. But it's pretty cool. Dawn French is beloved. I just saw her as a judge on UK Drag Race, and I was happy to see her there. Dawn French is lovely. Everyone likes Dawn French. We all grew up with her in our house on our TVs, and she's lovely. And for her to have written a novel about motherhood, and it's not non-fiction, it's not biography as I assumed it was, but this is the Women's Prize for Fiction. It's pretty cool to see a novel by Dawn French on this list. And you kind of think, well, okay, so she got onto this list because she's Dawn French, it was easy for her to get a book out, she's already famous. Kind of like Richard Osman with, what's it called, The Thursday Murder Club. You kind of have a bit of cynicism towards this. Oh, they're celebrities, it's easy for them to get a book published, how good could it be? But I trust Bernardine Evaristo and the other judges. I trust their recommendations, and I have to admit, I have my interest piqued by this. Another one that's kind of curious is Small Pleasures by Claire Chambers. My partner Jess almost ran out and bought this book the second that she saw the cover. She is someone who does judge books by covers, and so do I, so do we all, that's why books have covers. But she saw the cover of this and was like, I at least need a poster of this cover. It is an absolutely stunning piece of artwork. Very, very colourful, very eye-catching, very textured and pastel-y and lovely. And immediately we were both like, oh, this looks great, this is definitely going to be up our street. And actually I read the blurb and I wasn't that captivated by it. So if you've read Small Pleasures, this is a book that I'm teetering on the edge of getting because the cover is beautiful and the hype is real, but I wasn't sold by the blurb. Please let me know, because I only need a little push to actually go out and get and read this book. Another book that I'm really happy to see on this list, and it represents the racial diversity of this list, which is pretty huge. We've got Luster by Raven Leilani, and we've got The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, and now we also have the new Yaa Gyasi book. The book is called Transcendent Kingdom, and Yaa Gyasi's Homegoing was a colossal success. A beautiful novel, absolutely heart-wrenchingly gorgeous piece of fiction, so beautiful. And Transcendent Kingdom I have not read, and I actually, for some reason, it must have flown under my radar. I knew of its existence, but I wasn't sure if it was even out yet, and I'm still not sure. It must be out. But maybe it just didn't get the hype behind it that it should have. Homegoing certainly did. Whatever the case, Yaa Gyasi is a wonderful author, and this is a really exciting one. Again, I have not gotten to it, and I have every intention. I had every intention before. I read and review a lot of books, so don't hold it against me. But if you have read Transcending Kingdom, please let me know if it's any good, because, again, this is one that I'm teetering on the edge of. I don't really need a reason to read it. I'm going to try to get to it as soon as possible, and having it on this list is that extra push. And the last book that I am completely familiar with is Ali Smith's Summer. Ali Smith has been working on this seasonal quartet for years. I remember I came home from Tokyo and I moved to Bristol when Autumn came out, and it's been a year ever since. And it was kind of advertised at the time as a kind of post-Brexit, anti-Brexit book. And obviously, I had just come home after the Brexit vote. I was furious. I'm still furious. And it wasn't a book that I wanted to read at the time because I wanted to escape my anger. I wanted to escape my frustration. And I still do. You know, I live angry every day about Brexit and the Brexit vote. And I just couldn't face reading Autumn if that's exactly what kind of a book it was. But every year that goes by, these books kept coming out. Autumn, winter, spring, summer, and all the time I kind of stopped myself from reading them, afraid of what I'd find. Last summer, I was in a bookshop in The Hague. I remember picking Autumn up off the shelf again. I remember reading the first 2-3 pages while I was stood there, and Autumn was captivating. My friend Rick has talked about how he also read the first few pages of Autumn, and it did the opposite to him. He read it, and the style of the writing and the language, he just couldn't bear it, and he didn't want to read it after that. For me, it did the opposite, and yet I still haven't actually read it. And now that Summer is on this list, and the quartet is finished, I'd love to buy them in a little collection and read them all. And this is it. This is my push. Now, everything that's left for me to talk about, I'm going to talk about really, really quickly because I don't know it. Everything that's left are books that I was not aware of at all. There is a book on this list written by a trans woman. Yay! The book by the trans woman is called Detransition Baby, and the writer in question is Tori Peters. I'd not heard of Tori Peters. I'd not heard of Detransition Baby, but I really want to read it now. I really was sold by what Everesto said in her video about the book, and I want to read more books by trans writers. On our website, we actually have an article. It's a list of trans books by trans writers. I urge you to go read it. All of those books have helped me in some way, and trans writers are very, very important to me, and we need a lot more of them. And so this is another book for me to add to my collection, and it's probably the book on this list that I haven't read that I'm going to read first. Before I read The Vanishing Half, before I read Transcendent Kingdom, before I read the Ali Smith books, I'm going to read Detransition Baby. Because that's what interests me. I didn't know it existed until an hour ago, and I'm very, very excited to read it. And the fact that a book by a trans writer is on the list is very, very exciting. Because our world, and especially the United Kingdom, has issues with trans people existing. There are cis people who are very angry at the existence of trans people. They feel threatened. Obviously, I could make 20 articles and 100 videos out of this issue, and a lot of people have, so I'm not going to dig into it here. But the fact that a trans woman has been included on this list for the Women's Prize is cause for celebration. The Golden Rule by Amanda Craig is on this list. She was one of those writers who signed a I stand with J.K. Rowling list thing of writers who think that J.K. Rowling is sound. Not great. I mean, J.K. Rowling sucks, and I wouldn't be happy to see her on this list. It's not brilliant, and I'm not happy, but I will be reading Detransition Baby imminently. In fact, I'll probably go out and buy it right now. Everything else on this list is literally stuff that I haven't heard of, so I really cannot comment too much on it. There is Unsettled Ground, which is written by Claire Fuller. This one immediately caught my interest. I memorized the premise. One of the judges said that it is a book about a pair of twins who are both 50 years old and still live with their mother, and then their mother suddenly dies, and it's about what comes next. And that just immediately piqued my interest, because I was like, what does come next? So this is a book that I'm actually really, really tempted to pick up. It sounds interesting on that premise alone. How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House. This is a book by Cherie or Cherry Jones. I think it's Cherie Jones. And that's pretty much all I know. But it does speak to the racial diversity of this list. The racial diversity, at least between black and white writers, is really impressive. And we've also, as I've said, got a trans woman writer on here. So the diversity is pretty decent. As far as I know, the Women's Prize only allows for fiction written in English, so there's nothing in translation here, and books in translation are my wheelhouse, so it's a little disappointing to see that, but I guess you have to draw the line somewhere? Whatever the case, there's a really good diversity between black and white writers, at least here, and that's really cool to see. I haven't counted, but it seems like a kind of 50-50 split, so that's cool. No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. Absolutely no idea what it's about. Cannot remember what the judges said. I'll have to do some research. I can't comment. Same for Consent by Annabelle Lyon. do not know this book. I heard that it's about the issues of gender in our society, gender inequality, sexual inequality. The fact that it's called Consent probably has something to do with the law, maybe the law favouring men and patriarchy, etc., but I don't actually know. But a title like that stirs up immediate thoughts, images, and stories within your mind, at least it does for me, so I'll have to do some research and see how this one plays out, I guess. I'm not sure. And there's also Nothing But Blue Sky by Kathleen McMahon. I think that's how you say it, McMahon. And I don't know anything about this one either. It's a terrible limp way to end the video, but I don't know anything about it. There are, what was that? 4, 5 books on this list that I really don't know. And I'm happy to admit that. So what we have here is a series of books that, if you go back to the start of the video, you'll see that I hugely recommend. Books that I'm really, really excited to read. Books that I'd always planned on reading but hadn't got around to yet, and this gives me an extra push, and probably you as well. And a few books that I'm not sold on, not sure yet, didn't know anything about. I'll do some research. And a trans writer who I didn't know existed, I didn't know her book existed, and it's going to be the first one that I get to, aside from the ones I have already read. So this was a reaction video, something that I never ever thought I would make. I promise I'm not being held hostage, but here we are, crazy world, and I'm depressed, so I did this. Actually, this list is pretty decent. There's a lot of diversity on here, and the fact that Bernardine Evaristo chaired the judges and led the charge proves that picking good judges means you get good books. We've had a bunch of new patrons join our Patreon since we launched it. We get like 1 new patron every 2-3 days, and that just really means a lot. If you want to add to that and help us out, I would really, really hugely appreciate it. Thank you in advance, and thank you to the patrons who have signed up and joined us. And as always, subscribe for books.